3 p.m. Eastern Time in the United States. So good afternoon. Welcome to this week's episode of Warriors Whiteboard Wednesday. And we're going to be working on or focusing on during this episode, if you missed all the extra stuff that we threw out ahead of time, right, is this weapon called the Kusari-Fundo. Kusari-Fundo, right? Lots of other names. I'll go into that shortly here, right? But we'll start off like I always do. We'll take a look at the translation, right? Kusari-Fundo, right? Kusari is a chain, right? Chain. Oops. Chain. And a fundo is a weight. Wait. Just wait. Not wait like hold on, which was what I just meant. But anyway, right? Kusari-Fundo, right? So a chain with weights, right? Typically, a Kusari-Fundo is a Yuta Kusari-Fundo, which means there's a weight on each end, right? Got a little sample here that we use for training in the dojo, right? Just plastic, right? The thing. I thought I'd pull this because it would give us better contrast against all this black as opposed to a metal one that we have laying around, right? So a weight on each end, right? And so folks might recognize this by a different name if you've been around for a while, right? There's another name for this, Manriki Gusari, right? Manriki Gusari. So Manriki Gusari, right? Don't get thrown off by that G, right? The K-G kind of thing is a Japanese linguistic kind of thing, right? So it's hard to say Manriki Kusari in Japanese. So the K here normally turns into a G. It's still a chain, right? Manriki typically translated as 10,000 power chain, right? Sometimes it's just called a Manriki, right? Okay. Different names for these things, different lineages use them. I just threw out a whole bunch of notes here as I was prepping for this thing, just so I don't know, I could make sure you guys had stuff, right? So the Kusari-Fundo, in whatever name, right, was used in the Manriki school, the Musashi Ryu, that's the one, Miyamoto Musashi, right, where our knife stuff comes from, okay? The Masaki Ryu, M-A-S-A-K-I, not Masaaki, like Hatsumi, different name, right? Little story, right? Masaki, this guy that, right, founded this one lineage, right? He was in a leadership position in Edo Castle. Edo is what we now know of as Tokyo, right? That region, right? So he was a head of the guard, right? And he was often responsible for manning the main gate, right? So he got to thinking about, defending the gate itself, right? Now he could have his, other guards come in and handle whatever situation or whatever, but and of course he was armed with a sword. Most people think about that, right? He had to have had a spear. He had to have had a sword, whatever, right? Why come up with a different weapon? When you already have one. Well, see, we have to look at culture, right? If we're studying Japanese martial arts, if we're studying Chinese, Korean, whatever martial arts, right? And you're not studying Japanese, Chinese, Korean history and culture, then you're probably missing a big part as to why things were created the way they were, right? And I know, right? We Americans or Canadians or whatever, Western people, right? Get a little more loose with those kind of things because all that matters is to win. Except where this stuff came from, there were other considerations, right? One of those considerations was in having to defend the main gate and cutting someone down and leaving a big bloody mess, which would have been kind of taboo or at least not seen in very good light at the main gate, right? At the main gate to the palace, that kind of thing, right? So went about developing this weapon. So, right, the whole idea was a bloodless weapon, right? Bloodless weapons. It's kind of the same thing in Europe during the Dark Ages. Clergymen were not carrying daggers and swords and things like that, typically, right? They were carrying these religious implements that, had all kinds of jewels and symbols on them and stuff like that, right? Pretty cool way to disguise a weapon, don't you think? Okay, so just a mace, right? But if we give it a whole bunch of other connotations, right? But again, it was developed as a bloodless weapon to at least incapacitate somebody, and then maybe, who knows, you drag them off to the back corner of the castle, and then you can spill blood all you want, right? Anyway, a couple other names that I've encountered over the years in my research and looking things up, instead of just like, grabbing one and going, well, that's what we call it. Well, great, okay, but what else is out there that we might be able to look at as far as techniques and strategies and things like that? But we can't find it because we don't know any alternate names. Okay, some other names for Kusari-Fundo was a Fundo Gusari, right, which is writing it backwards, right? Fundo Gusari, right, now is a weighted chain, right? Tamagusari, right, ball chain, which looks closest to what a lot of people know of as the Manriku Gusari. So instead of having these, these like bar or rectangle or hexagonal, whatever, ends on it, right? And they weren't always the same size. Sometimes you had one that was longer, that was going to be the holding part. The other one was smaller. Sometimes you had a bar on one end or a squared off piece of metal or whatever, and then a ball on the other. Lots of different designs, right? But there's this idea, right? And one of the reasons, or one of the things I came up with, just in kind of an insight understanding kind of thing, is if we look at the way something was named, often it can give us a hint into uses. Okay, so we're going to go into that, right? Kusari-Fundo being something to be classified as a ningu, right? Ningu, special ninja tools, right? It's a stealth weapon. It's a weapon for situations where carrying a sword is either not allowed or it's inconvenient, right? That kind of thing, right? So anyway, Tamagusari, Sode-gusari, right? If you understand Sode, right? It's a part of the armor, right? Part of our armor. Sode is sleeve, right? So Sode-gusari is a sleeve chain. Right? Well, what the hell is that, right? I mean, I can't tuck it up my sleeve. It's weighted. It's just going to fall back out. Unless we understand Japanese clothing. This also goes into another name, futokoro. Futokoro means pocket, right? Pocket, right? Not pocket Westerners have. Okay, where were the pockets in kimono? Okay, so in kimono, right, you could have pockets. Oh, I made that backwards. That's death clothing, right? This way, right? So, like in shinobi shizoi, the costumes and whatnot, right? Often you'll see like a pocket that's sewn in here. Pockets can be sewn in lots of different places, but standard clothing, the pocket in kimono is here. It's inside the sleeves. Okay? So whether you call something a sleeve chain or a pocket chain, you're talking about something that's just easily tucked into, right? So you just reach up the sleeve and just drop it in this pocket that's in here, right? So think about Westerners cuffing the sleeve of a shirt or the sleeve of, or the hem of pants and whatnot, right? That cuff, we normally roll to the outside, okay? But if you rolled it to the inside and then tacked or partially stitched, except for a small opening, you now reach up and, okay, watch some of the old Chinese movies, or like Chinese martial arts movies, or Japanese movies from way back, right? When they're going for something that they're carrying, whether it's money or whatever, right? Reach up into the kimono sleeve, right? Pull it out, right? It's that kind of idea, right? So you've got this idea of concealment, or something that's easily carried, but it's out of sight, out of mind, that kind of thing, right? What else do we have? Inyo gusari, right? Inyo is the Japanese way of referring to the yin yang, right? That kind of thing. And that has its own kind of implication, right? Where you're taking things and you're flipping them, right? So, he thinks he's dealing with somebody who's unarmed, and, he has the advantage, but suddenly you flip the situation, and now, right, he brought a knife to a chain fight or whatever, right? Okay. And then there's this a name, Kusari-jute, right? A chain jute, right? Everybody knows a jute, right? It's that single prong kind of thing. Everybody thinks it's a variation of a sai. Everybody thinks it was. I've read some historical things where this guy or this guy developed it as a weapon or whatever. The jute originally was a symbol of office in ancient Japan, right? That ended up being applied as a weapon over time, kind of like the shuko, right? The hand claws. It was a farming tool, right? The tonfa, same thing. The sides, it's just, people, if we always look at things from a weapon perspective, whatever we're doing, the way we think about it, the way we act on it or whatever is going to bottleneck, right? We're going to hit a ceiling because we can't go beyond that. But if we can recognize that a lot of these things, sword excluded, started off as just farming tools, utility tools, whatever. The word tool, right? Ninja tools, special tools, that kind of thing, right? Kusari-Ryuta was a chain and dragon claw, right? This was one of those things where it was much longer, but it would be used on shipboard, right? So if I'm going to board another ship, right, we get close enough, then these things are thrown over, right? In the West, we normally think of like grappling hooks and things like that, but they had these other names, right? So it gets thrown over, I'm going to snag that ship, and I'm going to pull us closer together so our guys can board that ship, right? Different names all over the place, right? There's actually a weapon that predates all this Kusari-Fundo kind of stuff. Hatsumi Sensei did at least one article that I remember, but maybe some other ones along the way, right, that actually predates the Kusari-Fundo and all of these things, right? And it was called a konpi. Konpi, right? It sounds like something out of Star Trek that Spock or the Klingons would have used or whatever, right? Konpi is like it's kind of a catch-all name for all these. You can look it up, you look up the kanji and whatnot, and determine what you want to call it. But a konpi traditionally, originally was a length of chain with a weight on it, and that there was nothing on this end, right? So the original kind of use was they would have just grabbed a length of chain. Konpi were thought to be one of the three primary tools laying around stables, right? So they had these things to work with, right? So you could just kind of loop it over, the links would catch, you could temporarily hold something in place, take it back off. Again, utility stuff, right? But what they think is that originally, right, you would just kind of wrapped it around the hand this way and then used it as you needed to. Over time, though, and the article that I can remember that Hatsumi Sensei did probably like late 80s, maybe early to mid 90s. I know I'm a little bit old. Anyway, he did this thing on the konpi, and that one actually had a loop right on the other end. Okay, and so there was no distinguishing, kind of no special way that the loop was made. Sometimes they were odd shaped, sometimes they were crescent with a flat side, whatever, right? So it made it easier to hold on to this thing while you were flailing. But the way Hatsumi Sensei was teaching it was you actually slide your hand through, right? And now the weight is hanging, right? So you could now tuck it up your sleeve. So if you're walking around, right, in a venerable pose, right, it's down in the sleeve, but the other end is always right here. So it's easy if I'm maneuvering somebody and I catch him and I move his hand right down, the weight's actually going to automatically be gravity fed, slide out of my sleeve, and now I can catch it. And suddenly there's this thing that's involved in the fight that he didn't see originally. Pretty cool stuff, right? So my introduction to the Kusari-Fundo, obviously, right, through my original training with Shoshi Hayes, but when we really dove into it, kind of from a foundational standpoint, right, was at a ninja festival, 1989. It was the first time I met Manaka Dai-shihan, or Manaka Shihan, as we called him back in the day, right? Long before he, moved away from the Bujinkan, founded the Jininkan, that kind of thing, right? He was Hatsumi Sensei's right-hand man. So we did this whole training thing, right? He was the guest teacher at one of these ninja festivals that we did every year, and it was a pretty cool thing, right? So I think the most interesting thing to me was, I, like many people, imagine this thing, for choking and for flailing and ensnaring somebody, because it's a part of the techniques, right? But when we're looking at the basics, right? The basics, there's three foundational uses, right? Okay. So one, and this all has to do with striking, believe it or not, right? So the first one, shooting strikes. Right? I usually don't do a whole lot of active teaching, like demonstration kind of things during these Whiteboard Wednesdays because it's about strategy. But I'm going to show you how the weapon is typically held so that you can shoot it out of your hand, pop this guy in the in the face or throat or whatever with the weight, and then very, very quickly retract it. There's a little. Every weapon has a grip change maneuver, whether it's from foregrip to reverse grip or whatever, right? Same thing with Kusari, right? The shuriken has a, flip it into your hand so that you can use it handheld, flip it so you can throw it, that kind of thing, right? The Kusari has the same kind of thing because if I'm using it to whip or strike and I got to get it back into my hand again for something like this, right? And I'm in a battle, right? I don't have time to be fumbling around with this thing. I'll show you that as well, right? So there's shooting strikes, right? There's swinging or whipping strikes, right? Swinging or whipping strikes, right? Call it flailing, call it whatever you want, right? And then there's handheld as a force amplifier, right? To deliver strikes with it in your hand, or to do Kyusho attacks, right? Attacking sensitive points, rubbing across sensitive areas, those kind of things. Again, I'll show you how that's held, right? But Sensei, what about choking? What about entwining? What about ensnaring somebody? What about wrapping them up? Those kind of things, right? Remember, our stuff, the Kusari-Fundo isn't a part of the typical 9 Yuhan, the Bujinkan that everybody wants to gravitate to. Okay, this actually came in through the Masaki Ryu, right, and partly through the Musashi school, right? Schools that Hatsumi Sensei had been indoctrinated into long before he met Takamasa Sensei, right? But, okay, wrapping and snaring, call it whatever you want, is a variation. It's not a primary. Okay, it's a variation, right? So, again, I'll show you a couple of these things. Swinging strikes, because of the distance I have right here, it's going to be very, very difficult. So you're going to need to jump in on that Friday virtual call if you want to catch some of that stuff. Same thing with a bunch of the handheld things. But I'll show you the shooting strike during this class. Big thing to remember with the Kusari is that, again, it was seen from a stealth perspective or as a backup kind of stand-in for when sword was impractical or not allowed, right? If you went to visit, let's say you were invited, right, to come to the Lord or the Shogun's palace or whatever, right, castle. When you get there, right, the Japanese custom required you to check your long arm at the door, right? You turned over your sword, right? Got a little pink slip or whatever, right? You get it back on the way out, okay? It was a way to put you in a disadvantaged position because all the Lord or the Shogun's security, right, would have had longer weapons, right? It puts you at a disadvantage. Now, they weren't allowed to disarm you completely because it would have been seen as removing your honor and whatever, right? So you were allowed to have a wakizashi, shoto, short sword, a jute, kusari, whatever. You were allowed to have some kind of weapon, but again, so this really requires an elevated sense of skill, right? Because you're going to be outgunned, so to speak, right? Okay. So again, carrying it and things like that are going to be, how you're doing it. So if we're not carrying it in the pocket, right, of a kimono, right? Typically, they didn't have what we consider to be pat downs and all that, right? But if you're carrying it off your obi, right? I've seen folks, loop it through and carry it so they can train and do all kinds of things. But the problem is in getting it out quickly, right? All weapons have to be deployed very, very quickly, right? So I want to loop this in a way so I can catch it and just pull, and then I've got this thing ready to go, okay? So to do that, it's just folding it and then coming up from underneath the obi, right? And then just looping it over. What I've seen is people take it and then run the weights through here. So now it's not going to fall off. Not only is it not going to fall off, but you're going to have a hell of a time getting this thing off when you need it, right? So again, we need to think about a quick draw kind of application, right? So putting it in and just letting it drop, right? So it doesn't matter if I grab the chain and pull, doesn't matter if I grab the weights and pull down. Either way, I'm going to get this thing in my hands and I'm ready to go. Okay, so I'm going to switch over to this mock-up, right? One year I was in Japan. I've always had a hard time finding like suitable chain, like plastic chain, safe stuff for things in the dojo. And one year I was in Japan, and I was at basically the equivalent of a hardware store, because that's where you find cheaper shinden and things like that, right? For the dojo, you find tabi and socks and all kinds of stuff, right? So anyway, I was walking by and saw these little lengths of chain and thought, oh, I can use that, right? And then all I had to do was find some bar, right? This is problematic with use. I mean, it's a little bit safer than a metal one, but it's still going to kink and pinch skin and stuff like that, right? So, we typically have ropes and whatnot, knotted ropes that are made. Cuts down on the abuse a little bit more, right? But when a chain is made, typically the chain on a Kusari-Fundo, right? The way I was taught was the length of the chain is custom for the user, right? So your Kusari should be custom to you. Doesn't matter if it's a rope mock-up, doesn't matter, right? So the way that works is we hold one weight in our hand this way and then extend the arm all the way out, and then the second weight should fall short of your face or your skull. That's in case you have to swing out here and it comes around, right? You don't need a dentist, okay? This kind of thing, right? So it's this kind of length, okay? Longer than that, you're probably gonna have to choke up on it a little bit so you don't bang into yourself, or use it as you want, right? Sorry, the chain could be anything from give or take a foot, right? Imperial lengths here, right? A foot to 3-4 feet, right? But typically, the way we were taught from a safety perspective, this kind of distance, right? So you see the end of the weight right there, right? Okay. So, but the other thing with the makeup, right, is there has to be balance. Okay. Now, if you're using it as a konpi kind of thing, where you're only going to be using one weight, right? It typically doesn't matter, but you have to try this out. Okay. The idea is that whatever the weight of the chain is, let's say the chain is 2 ounces. Okay. Then the maximum weight of each weight, right, is 2 ounces. Okay. The reason for that is when you get this thing moving and flying around, right, there's going to be a whole lot of torque put on this link. And often there was an intermediary link between the link of the chain and the weight you're connecting it to. And often it was round, usually because of crude blacksmithing kind of things, right? People, again, there's this reason that things weren't the sharpness that we think, or the weapons were developed the way they were made the way they were, or whatever. It was based on technology, right? If they don't understand how to make something that in today's world, blacksmiths would go, well, that's freaking simple. You just do, but they didn't know that. Okay, we need to stop projecting our beliefs or our knowledge or our understanding onto people that the way they looked at the world and the things that they understood were very, very different, right? We have to recognize that this was like hidden James Bond technology of the day, right? As opposed to things that were spring loaded or used a gas cylinder. Come on, man, right? So people talk out of their ass sometimes because their mouth knows better, or it should. Anyway, so if the chain is 4 ounces, each weight's going to be up to 4 ounces or whatever. But here's the difference, right? Okay, so we want to make sure that the weight is not too heavy because of the stress placed on the chain, and this thing could go flying off, and then you have less of an impactful weapon, right? But also, if the weight is lighter than the chain, what's going to happen is the chain's going to lead, and the weight's just going to be drugged behind, and you're not going to get the benefit of this piece when it reaches out, okay, when it hits, right? So there are these little dynamics that go along with the way a weapon is made, okay? So anyway, so again, I'll keep using this because of the contrast, right? So we don't have black on black, right? Quick, just a handheld kind of thing, right? So there are lots of ways that you can hold this thing for reinforcing and hitting and those kind of things, right? So this is one of them. But if we're going to have the greatest degree of flexibility, right? I want to be able to do shooting strikes, whipping, flailing strikes. I want to be able to, strike with it in my hand and all that. Then we got to put some thought into this, right? Because we're preparing for a chaotic, adaptive, ever-changing, let's call it an experience, shall we? Right? It's a fight, right? So whatever we choose kind of puts a bottleneck, creates a ceiling, right? Again, that we're going to bang into. And if we're not adaptive enough, then, well, you get to die with pride, right? Anyway, all right. So what we're going to do is we're going to hold one weight in the hand. It should project past the meat of the hand just a little bit, right? So we've got this ability to strike, right? We're going to let the weight drop down behind the back of the hand and the arm. We're going to take the other weight and we're going to hold it between the index finger and the middle finger, much like holding a cigarette or a cigar. I don't know any other way of describing that kind of position, okay? So when we hold it, when we're holding it this way, now we've got the ability to strike here or rub, dig, right? Same thing here, rub, dig, right? We've got this stuff extending off the back, okay? And then what we're going to do is just ball up the chain, drop it on the webbing of the hand, and hold it in place with the thumb. So again, now we have metal, we've got metal, right? But we have the ability to shoot this thing out and catch, right? So again, right? And again, I'm going to be showing you the fumbling. So when I show you the cool little combat reload thing, it'll make much more sense, right? So again, draping it over the back, catching this way, balling it up, right? Holding it with the thumb so you have it. And then what we're looking at doing is, some of you guys were probably raised in a passive society, so maybe you didn't do this stuff. But for those of us who are old enough and we actually played outside, right? We played cops and robbers, played cowboys and Indians, played whatever, right? Okay? Made the little finger guns, okay? Bang, pew, pew, whatever, okay? So we're going to go from fist to this. And the index finger should point at what you want to hit. Because what's going to happen, since this weight, the weight in the hand right here, is in a position, see where the top of it is? It's right here, where the link connects. So when I point, and this thing flies out of my hand, right? See what's lined up? Index finger, okay? So it's going to come across this way and go in that direction. I'll show you that again in a minute, okay? Holding it, right? And from right here, pointing, okay? And the weight, sorry, I'll hold that one, right? So from here, right, straight out, okay? Straight out. This is just a basic, right? Being able to do this shooting strike so you can pop somebody in the face this way. Taijutsu is really, really important. Remember, all weapons are stupid, right? They will hurt whatever they hit, okay? Including you, right? So if you do some dumb shit, like throw this thing out there and it comes flying back, it's going to hit. If it hits you, rib, face, neck, hip bone, what they just hit me on, right? You're going to get hurt, right? So we need to make sure that we understand that when we're doing that, we're getting out of the way. And then we need to do lots of other things that I'm not going to cover during this lesson because I don't have enough time. Grounding out that energy, how to re-grab it so that you're not fumbling around and trying to catch it again, all those kind of things, right? So let's take a look at this combat reload, right? So again, if I just did it like I taught a beginner how to hold it, right, we'd be doing something like this. We'd be fumbling around trying to get it so we could launch it again, right? Or we could take advantage of the design of our body, right? So our chest, you can't see this in black because video cuts everything out, right? But you know you have a depression right here, right? So unless you have a deformity where this is all bulged out, which is going to make it more difficult, right? But right where your sternum is, pec muscle, there's a V right here, okay? So if I'm holding this and I catch it and I drop it right in here, just drop it so it's in that channel, and I hold this hand out so that this drops into it, okay? It doesn't matter how I catch it, but just let it drop into your hand. And from right here, I'm just going to drop it into my hand. See it? I'm using my chest, the hachi, right? The hachi runs this way, but I'm using this V cut to drop this into my hand, and then I have the whole bundle. I just do this. Okay? So 1, drop, 2, It's actually faster with metal because you got more weight. Okay? Straight, out, straight, out. Okay? So you just lay it in the channel, drop this into your hand, right? You probably already have it, right? Now, I'll show this on Friday during the class, right? Catch this and end up with this weight in my hand, and I simply drop it into that position. Everything's now in this hand except for this weight, which was being held onto. Okay? I simply take this, lay it on top of the gun, right on top of the webbing, and catch the weight. So now I've got handheld, force amplifier, right? I've got shooting strikes, and I've got these big old whipping, flailing strikes that allow for things to do what they need to do, right? Make sure I didn't miss anything. I don't know if I mentioned it or not, but the police during the Edo period, right? The Kusari-Fundo was one of the non-lethal weapons that they carried, right, for arrest techniques, just like they carried a jute, right? I think we had that discussion a long time ago, right? So a jute, that's kind of where people started to get the idea that it was a sword catcher and all that kind of stuff, right? But these weapons, really, really cool. Speaking of the jute, right, I know we're talking about Kusari, but the way the police use these things, right? Cool little CSI thing from ancient Japan, right? If you came upon a body that had no obvious signs of death, right? No stab wounds, no cuts, they weren't decapitated or whatever, just dead, right? There are no forensic labs and all that kind of stuff, right? But the cool thing is that the poisons of the day reacted to silver, right? A chemical reaction, and turned the silver black. So the jute that the police officers carried very often were tipped with silver. So if they came across a body like that, they could just open the mouth, stick the jute in there, swish it around a little bit, pull it back out, and if the silver was black, they know the person was poisoned to death. Pretty interesting stuff, right? Okay. Why do we need to know that now? I don't know, right? But knowledge is power. Okay. So Kusari-Fundo, weighted chain, call it a Manriki Kusari, call it a Kusari-Fundo, call it a Fundo Kusari, call it whatever you want, right? I don't care. But this is an aspect of the training that crosses over into stealth, crosses over into utility. Be careful though where you live, right? At least two places that I know of in the world, the state of Massachusetts here in the United States and the Republic of Ireland, right? It is a felony, right? This is an illegal weapon in the Republic of China, or in the Republic of Ireland, sorry, I apologize. And in the state of Massachusetts here in the United States, this is a felony. It's a felony to carry one of these, okay? So I don't know if in those areas there's exceptions. If you're carrying things to and from martial arts, like there is here in Pennsylvania, like if you're carrying nunchaku or shuriken or whatever, as long as you're going to and from martial arts and it's being used in the context of class, you're okay. Otherwise, you're out hanging out, you get funky with your friends and the cops show up and all that, do a pat down, they find them, you're going to jail, okay? So, but how's that different from ancient Japan? Well, in ancient Japan, see, shuriken were designed the way they were and all that kind of stuff because it was hidden. Right? They were hidden. They weren't just hidden like on your body. They could be in plain sight in a sack. But if I'm dressed as a carpenter or a tradesman who would have something that looked like this as a nail puller or as a washer on an abutment or something like that, it's all good, right? So thinking ahead about how, right? We're not just defending against that jackwagon that's coming. We also might have to defend against the legal system. So instead of hating on it, instead of talking about corruption, instead of playing the bullshit games that whiners and complainers pull, how about if we think about how we're going to circumnavigate the system or the issue, right? And have a plausible deniability kind of reason for having something like this on you, right? Does it take more work and effort? Yeah, but Ninja were never lazy, so why the hell should we be? Okay? Just because we live in a drive-up window society doesn't mean we need to act like. That's what we prefer, even if you do. Okay? Anyway, Kusari-Fundo, Kompi, all those other names that I listed, right? Think about sleeve chain, pocket chain, whatever, right? But the basics, right? Shooting strikes, swinging or whipping strikes, handheld for striking or rubbing on sensitive areas, Kyusho, that kind of thing, right? Wrapping, entwining, choking, all those kind of things are seen as a variation, right? So it should help people prioritize things, right? So hopefully this was helpful. Hopefully you got something out of it. If you want more, right, and demonstration of the weapon in use and whatnot, right, this Friday, right, there's the virtual training link. I'm going to have to double check to make sure that everything's turned on, right? If you go to that page and it's either the countdown is down to 0 or whatever, the buttons will probably be gone because we have a limit of 15 people on there because I can only handle so many people in class and on a Zoom call, right? And be able to check out what everybody's doing, okay? But if you want to do more, you can do that, $4.99, or jump into our Ninpo Masterclass, get 2 of those classes a week, right? Dojo classes and a whole bunch of other stuff. It's $47 a month, but you can check out the thing. If you go to that link right there, go below each of the buttons, right? There's a little blue link. I think it's blue unless you change the colors on your screen, right? Just a little link that you can go to the information page and learn about this Ninpo Masterclass, right? Get a whole bunch of extra stuff. Even if the times don't work out for you, everything's recorded, right? So you're going to get forever access to things anyway. But give it a shot, all right? Pun intended. Get it? All right, that's it. I think we're on time, so I will talk to everybody again next week on Warriors Whiteboard Wednesday. Stay safe.